welcome to tonight's webinar, Build and Maintain Strength Training for Triathletes with David Glover and Krista Schultz. I'm just going to do a quick introduction, and this is David, and I'll introduce Krista, and then she'll introduce me. So Krista has been a long-time triathlon coach. She has her Bachelor's of Science in Exercise Physiology and a Master's in Education and Athletic Administration from Gail College. As a coach, she's certified by USA Triathlon, USA Weightlifting, USA Cycling, and the National Strength and Conditioning Association. She has certifications for both Certified Personal Trainer and CSCS, or Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist. As a triathlete, she's been an athlete for more than a decade. She's qualified for and raced at the Ironman World Championship in Hawaii. She's represented the state of Maryland from 2006 to 2008 for the Best of the U.S. Amateur Triathlon competition. And she's also a 4-time USAT All-American.
Thank you, David. Quickly introduce David Glover. He is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. David is a cancer survivor. He is the author of the book Full-Time and Sub-9 about racing iron distance triathlons and incorporating the training and racing into your everyday life. He is the founder and director of the Luray Triathlons in Luray, Virginia. He's completed, I always get this number wrong, I think 28 iron distance races. And out of those, he's won 5 and gone under 9 hours. Also qualified for Ironman Hawaii. He was also inducted in the Vineman Hall of Fame, and he holds 2 master's degrees. One of those is in exercise physiology, and he also has the National Strength and Conditioning Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist and USA Triathlon and Cycling certifications. And finally, he's the founder of School of Tri.
So real quick, these are the different businesses that we operate and run. She Does Tri is SheDoesTri.com is a triathlon coaching, training plans, and clinics and classes focused around women. As Krista mentioned, I'm the race director for the Luray Triathlon in Virginia. School of Tri is our education website for triathlon. And then finally, Endurance Works is our training plan and coaching website. So on to the formal presentation. So why strength training? And this is one of my favorite quotes. It's not the will to win, but the will to prepare to win that makes the difference. So let's start with an example.
So I have a client, we're just going to call her Gimpy Gail, and this isn't an actual picture of her, but basically she has gotten into marathon training, and I started working with her on, training for these marathons. She had a background of playing tennis and rock climbing, and what happened when she started training for marathons is she began to have these muscular imbalances, or tight muscles and weak muscles caused by, doing a lot of running and nothing else. So she basically developed further problems just continuing, through her marathon training, because she neglected to do some of the strength work that was in her program. And when she was doing the rock climbing, that seemed to help her a little bit more, but once, she stopped doing that, did more marathon training, and didn't do that strength training, that's when these imbalances started to occur. So she had some pretty serious things going on in her foot. So it could have been a combination of some plantar fasciitis, heel spur, so things that were inflamed in the foot because those muscles were weak, and because they were weak, they got very tight and inflamed. So because of that, her ankle suffered. She was on a long run, and her ankle just kind of gave out with, no sort of, she didn't realize it was coming on. And then the calves, and the adductors started to get tight, the inner thigh area, and that's because the glutes were weak. So her muscles that in her hips, and very terrible balance, poor posture, and core stability. So, like I mentioned, her hips and her glutes were really weak. The adductors were weak. So these are muscles that you use to go in different planes of motion. And we'll kind of talk about those planes of motion a little later. But because she was doing all that forward, call it the sagittal plane of motion, and overusing those muscles and not doing the strength work that she needed to, and developing all this poor posture and bad balance, things like that, over time, she really needed to incorporate strength in these areas because they were so weak. So we came up with a program she could do 3 times a week, working those glutes and hips, adductors, lower deep abdominals. So we'll get into specific exercises for that, and middle back to keep her skeletal structure in alignment. So all these different, strength exercises contributed to keeping her skeletal system in alignment, which also helped her muscles stay balanced. So once we had the strength work, I could introduce more interval training, and she wouldn't get hurt. And we also had her think about technique while she was running. So there's some specific things you can do for that as well. One of the things I like to do is running drills, which we do have on our website. You can find at School of Tri under warm-up for running.
Okay, there's a lot of myths associated with strength training, and one of the biggest ones, I think, especially for women, is lifting weights will give me big, bulky muscles. Another one is if I strength train, it's going to slow me down. And I think a lot of times we have this vision of, if we're going to lift weights, we're going to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and it's really not the case. And then finally, strength training won't help my performance. And I think we're going to make a compelling argument that it will help your performance, even if it's simply to help keep you from getting injured. And then finally, I don't have time to strength train. And this is actually probably the biggest struggle for many of us if you're balancing a job, a family, and on top of that, swim, bike, run, and trying to strength train. So we're not saying you need to hit the gym 4 or 5 days a week and lift for an hour and a half. But we'll give you some sample exercises that you can do, and even if you only have 5 or 10 minutes. So here's some of the facts. So when we talk about strength training, we're basically stressing the muscles. So the muscles, when we move, muscles cause movement. So if we stress the muscles, they're going to adapt to that, and they're going to become stronger. It's going to improve their function and improve their power. So if we think about swimming, biking, and running, these are all things we need to go faster. We need better muscle function. We need more strength, and we also need more power. And you think about the bike. I mean, if you've been in the sport for a long time, you may have a power meter, so we can actually measure that power. And there's a direct correlation between being stronger and being able to generate more power. Increases lean muscle mass. Okay. So, and decreases body fat. So, if you're somebody that's struggling with being overweight, or maybe you want to lose a little weight, weight training is a great way. If you have muscle mass, muscle is an active tissue. That's what burns calories. So by putting on a little bit of muscle mass, again, not bulky. So you can look at Krista. She lifts weights, and this is a picture from after Columbia Triathlon a few years ago. She can lift weights and not look bulky. So, but what it allows her to do is it allows her to stay injury-free, so it decreases the risk of injury and helps keep her body fat down. Boosts the anabolic hormones. So these are hormones that help with recovery. So again, if we're athletes and we're doing swim, bike, and run, we're breaking our body down. So we want to, if we can boost our anabolic hormones, like testosterone, for example, we can actually help in recovery. And then finally, slows the aging process. And we're going to talk about that a little bit at the end under special considerations. So the things we're going to run through tonight, just a real high-level overview of how muscles function and get stronger, some of the common injuries and their causes. And what's interesting is, as we go through that section, you'll see is there's some injuries that are actually very common to triathletes and runners. Go talk a little bit about proper exercise technique, and then give you some sample exercises and routines. And rather than try and demonstrate these in real time, what we've done is we have videos of these different exercises. So we will, when you get a copy of this presentation that I'll email out afterwards, you'll be able to watch the video that explains how to do the exercise. And finally, special considerations. So how does weight training differ for women versus men, and what happens as we get older. So first, how muscles function. And Wolff's Law is one of the fundamental laws of strength training, or exercise physiology. So the body conforms and adapts to the intensities and directions it is habitually subjected to. So as a simple example, if I'm going to be if I've never been cycling before and I get on a bike for the first time, I'm not going to be very effective. But over time, maybe over a couple of years, I can become a better cyclist as my body adapts to that stress.
Okay. So let's just start with talking about a little bit of physiology. I'm not going to overwhelm you with a bunch of technical terms, but you have to remember the muscles are activated by the brain. So it's not enough to just do an exercise, to go through the motion. It's important for us to think about the movement and actually cue our bodies into where we should feel that particular movement. So the muscles attach to tendons, which attach to bones. So it is important to remember your skeletal system is a big part of keeping your body in balance and those muscles in balance. So if your posture's bad from sitting in front of the TV or computer, you definitely want to work on that structurally from the skeletal system as well as muscularly. So those two work together. And like we talked about, the brain initiates muscle contraction, so the muscle is full of nerves and blood cells, and those connections are so important from the spinal cord. So we're all these things are integrated, and it starts with the thought process.
And I'm going to dig a little bit deeper under the physiology of a muscle, and this is, if you've been in triathlon for probably any amount of time, you've probably heard the term slow twitch or fast twitch muscle fibers. So basically, if you take a muscle, like in the previous picture, there was a picture of a bicep muscle, so that basically allows your arm to flex. You take any muscle in the body, it's going to be composed of up to 3 different types of fibers, and we're going to define type 1 as slow twitch. So these are muscles that if you go, there's actually a website, slowtwitch.com, focused on triathlon. So these are your endurance muscles. These are smaller muscles. They tend to be aerobics. They use oxygen, but they can go for a long time. Compare that with your type 2A and type 2B, which are fast twitch. So these are, as the name says, they're fast twitch. So they respond rapidly. They're bigger and they generate a lot of power, but they don't have the endurance of the slow twitch. So it's important to note that any given muscle is probably going to have some combination of these fibers, and it might vary from individual to individual. So some people may be more naturally inclined to be slow twitch athletes, like doing triathlons, marathoners, and some may be more inclined to be doing more explosive sports, like powerlifting, or even something like wrestling, where it's short periods of intense force. But it's just important to recognize there are these 3 types. Now, what's interesting is, given there's type 1, type 2A, and type 2B, so what this chart is showing is, if I look at the left-hand column, it's active muscle fiber percentage. So if I start on this left-hand column, and look at the right, which is exercise intensity, so if I'm doing no activity, my muscle fiber, nothing's firing. What happens though is if I walk along this lower x-axis, say to walk, as I walk, as I start to move, I start to activate slow twitch fibers. So if you see the first arrow here in the lower left-hand corner, what that's saying is at lower effort, so again, we're defining, at least in this chart, exercise intensity as a percentage of VO2 max. So you could just say it's your percentage of your maximum for the sake of simplicity. But what we're saying is, as we start to move, we're only engaging these type 1 fibers. As we go faster and faster, we start to engage the 2A and then finally the 2B. And so what this all is saying is that muscle fibers are recruited incrementally under the all or none principle. So if all I'm doing is easy runs or easy swims and bikes, say around 50%, I'm really only activating my type 1 and some of my type 2A. And the key point here is if I don't do higher intensities, for example, strength training or intervals, then I'm not going to engage these fast twitch B fibers, or I'm not going to engage these type 2A fully. And, like anything, if you don't use a muscle or muscle fiber, it's basically going to atrophy. So you're basically going to lose potential strength, power, and speed as a triathlete. Okay, so kind of give a quick overview of physiology. I want to talk a little bit about injury, and this quote's from a study that was done a few years ago by Burns and a number of researchers, and they looked at a number of athletes in both their preseason. So, for athletes in the U.S. or North America, it might be from say January through June. And then we'll define the competition season as July and August, and maybe into September. What they're saying is that 50% of triathletes sustain an injury in that 6-month preseason. So for every person on this call, half of you are going to get an injury this year. And then finally, if you go into the competitive season, another 37% were injured. So about 1 out of 3. So if you think about that, it's pretty high odds that you might get an injury. And so one of the ways we can address that is with strength training. Some of these things Krista talked about in her example, but some of the typical training issues that we do as triathletes, we tend to do long, slow training, especially if you're doing centuries or you're doing marathons or you're doing Ironman races. Highly repetitive motions in a single plane of motion. So we'll talk about the different planes of motion, but if you think about it, swim, bike, and run, all you're doing is moving forward. You're not moving laterally. You're not rotating, except for swimming. So swimming, especially running and biking, you're just moving in one plane of motion. You're just moving forward. And typically, and hopefully not you on the call, but a lot of triathletes just don't do strength training. And one of the reasons is time. Another is, hey, I'm exhausted. So those are valid reasons.
And just to add to the working in that single plane of motion while you're running and cycling, we typically don't use our muscles that balance the joints, the front and the back, of the leg, for example, and the muscles surrounding it very well until we train that. So training it in the weight room, even if you are working in the forward plane of motion, helps to awaken those muscles and stabilize them.
Yep, and then in the left-hand column, we're talking about typical training for a triathlete, typical lifestyle, and this is not necessarily for triathletes. This is for most of the probably most everybody, at least in the U.S. Poor posture. We tend to slouch. Forward rotation of our shoulders. If you use computer a lot, like me, for example, I tend to, I'll sit in front of my computer for hours at a time, and if I don't watch myself, I tend to hunch over. And then, also sitting for long periods of time, whether, it's driving, just sitting down working. So these are all things that can work against us.
So we talked about some of the problems in my example earlier, but basically these muscle imbalances that cause injuries are common in triathlon, because we do have, and I in particular have a lot of clients. I have a strength class I do, and a lot of my my clients that do endurance sports have these particular imbalances and weaknesses. So we work on muscle, we call it asymmetry. So we're trying to get the muscles that stabilize each other around the joint to work together better. Not necessarily equal them out, but help them fire and work together as a unit, rather than that one piece of the puzzle doing all the work. So, for example, if you're riding your bike and you're pushing down a lot and you're just using your quadriceps muscle, the front of your legs, and your body positions off and you're hunched over a bit, it's really hard to get those glute muscles to fire. So sometimes they're just turned off like a light switch. In the weight room, we can get those muscles to turn on by doing a fire hydrant exercise, which we'll talk about later, or doing some abduction, simple exercises. So another common problem is just losing the feel for the muscle. So we call that proprioception. So it's almost like when you learn to swim, you get a feel for the water. It's the same thing with getting muscles to fire. And again, we can develop programs to help you get that proprioception back. Big thing, range of motion. So flexibility is very important to generate power. When we lose that hip flexibility, when we're overusing quads and hip flexors, for example, the example I used on the bike, we can't generate the same amount of power. And we talked about balance earlier too. That becomes a problem because those, again, we don't have that symmetry in the muscular skeletal system. So that's how these things come about, from our constant training and lack of, supporting that training with the strength work.
So these are some very common overuse injuries for triathletes. If you've been in the sport for a long time, you may have had some or all of these. I think I've had everything on the list except a stress fracture. So, Achilles tendonitis, so inflammation, calf injuries, very common, tight calves, weak calves, IT band, that's the band, fibrous band that runs on the outside of your leg from your knee up to your hips. Plantar fasciitis, so the bottom of your feet, shoulder problems, SI joint, basically your hips are out of alignment, and then finally stress fracture. So very common injuries for triathletes. Other common causes of injuries, so we talked about just the regular stuff we do. Too much training volume overall, and again we talked about that same plane of motion, especially bike and run. We're just moving forward, so we're not moving laterally, or we're not doing any rotation. Sudden changes in training volume. So this is I see this a lot, like with athletes, especially even athletes who've been in the sport for a while, and maybe they haven't been doing a lot of training, and they ramp up really quickly. And I'll give you an extreme example. When I was in college, one of my classmates, he would, when he showed up, he'd been a wrestler in high school, and he was very fit. And he got into college, he stopped working out, except when he had to. And then every week, like 2 weeks before spring break, he'd go to the weight room, and he would just do these massive volume of weights, just biceps, bench press, all the beach muscles. And then he couldn't move his arms for like a week because he was just so sore. So that's sort of that happens in triathlon too, when you're going from, hey, it's been a nasty winter, I haven't been able to do anything outside, and all of a sudden I'm going to go out for a 5-hour bike ride with my buddies on Saturday and do a 2-hour run on Sunday. Well, that may be too much for your body. Your body may not be able to handle that volume. We talked about the lack of strength and or imbalances, poor body mechanics daily and or during training. So, one of the easiest things you can do for swim, bike, and run is find a knowledgeable coach and have them evaluate your form. With swimming, swimmers tend to get, as we swim, we tend to get a lot of shoulder injuries, so rotator cuffs. If you can correct your form, find a good swim coach, join a master's program where you get feedback. Biking, get a bike fit. It's probably the best, 100 to 3, how much you spend, $100 to $300 you'll ever spend. You can get a good bike fit that puts you in a better position biomechanically. It will also help you be more comfortable and ultimately generate more power and go faster. And the same thing with run. Get someone to evaluate your running. If you have chronic injuries, it's not enough just to buy new running shoes sometimes. Sometimes you need to do some corrections. Inadequate or improper warm-up and cool-down, especially if you're doing like high-intensity training. If you're going out for a slow jog or an easy bike, you don't really need to warm up per se, since you're easing into it. But if you're going out and say, I'm going to do a CrossFit workout tomorrow morning, if you can warm up 5 or 10 minutes before something light, jumping rope, jogging, then do the exercise, you're less likely to get injured, because you already have blood flowing and oxygen into your working muscles rather than going from 0 to 60. And then finally, inadequate rest. If you really have to, this is a really tough sport because you're training for 3 different sports, and it's easy to do too much. And even if say I'm doing 12 hours of training this week, and I've been doing that for a number of weeks, even if I do 12 hours next week, it may be too much if I have other stuff going on in my life. Maybe a relative passed away, or maybe I'm just working ridiculous hours. So you always got to take everything with that grain of salt of where you are right now.
I'll just address this question right now. Someone had asked in the comments before this webinar is, how do you know how much training to do for triathlon and weight training? And you just want to figure out your overall plan. So maybe it's buying a training plan, or getting advice from a coach or working with a coach. But if you want to figure out your volume, work backwards from your race, and then okay, this is how much training volume I want to get in, and really need to assess the body if you have imbalances and need to figure that out. Maybe seeing a physical therapist or a good strength and conditioning specialist, and then implementing 2 to 6 times a week, depending on what kind of program that is. So we talked about all these different things that can happen when you're doing, maybe for the first time, a marathon, or doing a lot of triathlon training, and you're in that same plane of motion, and you develop, you may feel like things are out of balance. You may feel like some muscles are getting overly fatigued, and you're not accessing, those balancing muscles that help prevent the fatigue and make your body more efficient. So you may even have been diagnosed with IT-band or plantar fasciitis. What do you do? And we really need to figure out what you're trying to accomplish. So this quote's good. Knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do. And if you're trying to get your muscles in balance, a good overall balance program is nice, but you want to be practical about what you're going to do. And, make it easy, make it simple. So considering that our body moves in 3 basic planes of motion, which we did, mention as far as the sagittal plane of motion goes, running, biking, and there's a great strength exercise in that plane of motion, which is a squat. And I talked about, the squat or working out the weight room. Even if you're in the sagittal plane of motion, you're going to utilize stabilizers. So for example, when you have a bar on your back or a barbell and you're doing a back squat and you're pressing up, you're using your abdominals, you're using your glutes, you're using, a lot of your stabilizers around your knee joint to push that weight up. So squat is a pretty much full body exercise that helps you access those muscles. And there's a lot of variations we can do of the squat. So to address, stability, planes of motion, other planes of motion. So, for example, just to briefly talk about the other planes of motion, a frontal plane of motion is like a jumping jack or, lateral lunge, think of like a ski lunge. Transverse is rotating, so throwing a frisbee, swinging a baseball bat, tennis swing, in the weight room doing a dumbbell fly exercise. So when we think about these different movements we want to do in the weight room, we want to remember certain guidelines. So we're not bodybuilders. The typical program that a bodybuilder would follow is not going to be the same for an endurance athlete. So I used to work with a few bodybuilders, and it was funny because one in particular would ask me all the time when I was lifting weights which muscle group I was focused on. Said, well, are you doing biceps today, biceps and back? And so my answer was, well, every time I lift, I try to incorporate full body movements, and not just isolating, trying to lift a lot of weight, but actually stability, balance, strength, and power. So thinking about all these different things I want to incorporate, I can't just focus on lifting a weight and doing a bicep curl and increasing that weight. I may do a double arm bicep curl and stand on one leg and try to utilize my core. To me, that's more of a full body movement and more applicable to the sport of triathlon, because when we're doing an analysis of a sport like swim, bike, run, we need to utilize all those muscles and learn to balance them so we get optimal power. Loading the spine, putting weight over you, as in a shoulder press or a back squat. Enhancing major muscle movers. So, we can think about the lats. Those are major muscle movers, especially in the water. And if you work on lat pull-down exercise, or, even a pull-up or sort of a modified pull-up, pullovers, those are major muscle groups that we can benefit from working in the weight room in the sport of swimming. Engage your stabilizers. So we have a lot of stabilizers because we need to be able to, remember, move that skeletal system and flex, extend, abduct, circumduct, all those joints. Maintain a balance. So when you do exercises, it's okay to go fast as long as they're controlled. So when I say controlled, we go back to how do the muscles function, and it starts with that thought process. So you need to be able to feel what you're working. You need to know what you're working. So you don't want to just swing your legs up and down without feeling your abdominals if you're doing a knee raise or a leg lift. You want to go slow enough and controlled enough where you feel what you're supposed to. I can't tell you how many times I see people do a movement and they do a ton of reps, maybe push-ups or sit-ups, and they just do it and get their heart rate up, but they don't feel the abdominals because they're not accessing those muscles. They're not thinking about it. The movement's too fast. They're stressing the joints and overworking some of those primary movers. So now a good number of repetitions is 8 to 20 reps, just depending on what exercise you're doing, and also, just figuring out your weight. So anything beyond that, usually I try not to go over 12 or 15, but it just, again, depends on what you're doing. And sometimes you use time. So for like a plank, you might try to hold it for a minute. And I always do at least 2 sets, and then 3 if time allows and I have enough energy. And going back to, it's not enough to just do the exercise. You have to think about it. I did a video about this because it's so important. And essentially, all your strength moves should almost become abdominal exercises as well. So we refer to that as core exercises. So if you're doing a back squat or even a shoulder press, and you feel let's say in the squat you feel low back pain, or in the shoulder press you feel neck tension, one of the cues I have in this video, it's a pretty short video, but I go through 3 basic cues to think about through all your strength training, also through your swim, bike, run activities. But I talk about bracing. So think about bracing as, your buddies kind of come up to you and punch you in the stomach. What do? You access a lot of those deep abdominal muscles, and you just automatically tighten them up. So if you can hold that position, And another cue is like initiating a cough or laughing or visualizing breaking out of a belt. So you might need to take a deep belly breath to access some of those things. But when you get that bracing, initialized, and you hold it and you do your squat or you do your shoulder press, the low back doesn't stress as much, the neck doesn't stress as much. A lot of the stress goes in the core, and that strengthens the core and helps you access the core during activities. The knee. We talk about the knee position, just strengthening the knee. So you want to think about, I see a lot of people's knees just slightly fall inward on a squat or even a pedal motion on a bike. Push your knee out towards your pinky toe of your foot. Not move it to the outside, but sort of in that general direction while you're performing the motion. And then when you think about, I used to say a lot, keep your weight on your heels or your feet. But now I like to think about the foot as a tripod. So big toe, little toe, heel, weight is evenly over the foot when you're pressing through on, let's say squats or lunges.
Yep, and we'll send out a copy of this, a link to a copy of this presentation online, and you can actually watch all these videos that are embedded in the presentation. So we've kind of talked around the strength training and a little bit about muscle function and common injuries and some guidelines. Just want to give you some specific exercises that you can use today if you wanted to.
Okay, so when we had a question also about flexibility and the importance, and I addressed that a little bit. So, we don't like to stretch. I think in general, it takes time. It may not feel great. Yoga classes are wonderful, but if you're in the weight room and you want to get some range of motion before your activity, we generally don't want to do static stretches because static stretches are holds where you're stretching the muscle. So, I might pull my leg up to stretch my quad out, the front of my leg, and hold it for about 20-30 seconds. With that, it opens up the muscles, but it weakens the muscle tissue for a period of time. So before you lift weights, we don't want to weaken the muscle, but we want to open it up and activate it. So these are, this video you can watch when we send it out. It's just 5 or 6 basic, easy dynamic stretches. So you're basically performing the stretch, feeling it, open up a little bit, and releasing and moving. So you're active, you get blood flow, lubricate the joints, and more importantly, you get those muscles to fire better and increase your range of motion. So you're going to actually get more out of that strength movement and feel better. So it takes about 5 minutes to do these, and they're very effective. I do them before track workouts. I've been really lucky not to be injured over the years of triathlon training, and I attribute a lot just to doing, stuff like this, opening up before preparing the muscles to work. So taking that 5 minutes to do this can mean preventing injury and having a better workout. So if you want to get a quick core workout, and again, by core, we talk about deep abdominal muscles that support the spine, also just a lot of muscles surrounding the torso, and even the glutes here. So I have front plank, side plank on the right side, back bridge, and left side plank. So you can hold these movements. The most important thing about them is to use those cues I talked about. So bracing, keeping things in alignment is extremely important. So like the bridge, you can think about the tripod and the foot. Some people just disperse the weight differently on the foot, and they feel the exercise differently. So we're trying to line up that skeletal system so the muscles will stabilize properly.
Yeah, and this is a great little routine. If you just have 5 minutes, you could do each one of these for 30 seconds, front plank, side plank on the right, back bridge and side plank on the left, and go through that again. And that's actually only 4 minutes, but maybe 5 minutes by the time you transition. But something you could do if you're limited on time, take 5 minutes, throw this into your day. And as I said, when you get the presentation, you'll be able to go to each of these videos, click on it, and in the video, Krista explains how to do the exercise properly.
So there are a lot of progressions to those, like the 4-point stability, but what I recommend first is being able to hold those positions properly, without curving your back over on the plank, really activating those abdominal muscles and so forth. And this is a video I did on 4 simple exercises to improve cycling efficiency. And I use an acronym, just the word BAG, B-A-G, so it's easy to think about what we're working, in these exercises. And B stands for back, A stands for abdominals, and G stands for glutes. So if those 3 things are strong, your cycling efficiency is better because your muscles are more imbalanced around those joints. And it just keeps your posture better, keeps your muscles from overworking, and accesses, the stabilizers to help you produce power. So I have a double external rotator exercise with a band, so that's also great for swimming. I do a dead bug, which is one of the very great exercises for deep abdominal work. And talk about a squat and a one-leg squat. So, balancing on one leg is great for your hip as long as we talked about that knee position and foot position. So here's a full body strength routine you can do, and we have all these videos. You can see the website at the bottom. It's enduranceworks.net under resources, strength training exercises. So in a good explosive exercise that also loads your spine is a push press. And I know a lot of people like to do CrossFit. A push press is a great exercise to introduce you to a powerful movement, such as power cleans, but very simple. So a lot of people can do it very well if you can do a shoulder press and drop your hips at the same time. So you get this explosive motion, and you also utilize those fast twitch muscle fibers even better. Overhead squats. Overhead squats are great for keeping your spine in the right position when you squat. And you can make progressions. That's when you kind of graduate to an exercise because you've mastered that other exercise. So the split squat is great for the glutes, strengthening that weaker leg, which we get from cycling and running sometimes is favoring one side, and then a single leg squat. So having somebody watch you do these, or knowing, looking in the mirror, making sure your knee's not coming in, you're, utilizing all these things to help you perform these exercises right, and knowing when to progress. So it may take 3-4 weeks of regular overhead squat work to get the right flexibility. Push-ups to plank push-ups. So plank push-ups are great for the core too. They do require a little arm strength, stability, so the push-up would be good to master first. Good morning exercise to a single leg good morning, which is great for foot strength, ankle stability, knee stability, and hip and glute strength. So mastering the one leg good morning or deadlift exercise is really important. We have those videos as well. So dumbbell row for your middle back. You can use some weight against that. Don't use those upper trap or neck muscles. Try to learn to retract your shoulder blades and pull by keeping your shoulders away from your ears. One of my favorites, double external rotation, calf raises, and crab walks with the band. So you can see all these things on our website. So the seasonal plan, there was a really good question about when do I strength train, how much preseason, do I keep strength training during the competitive season, off season. So I strength train all year round. All my clients, I try to get them to do some kind of strength work. If they're busy, at least doing yoga class, something they can incorporate into their plan all year round. And if you're not doing strength training during the preseason, when your competitive season comes, you're racing and you're training, you don't want to add all these, heavy weight-bearing exercises. But you may want to do some glute work. So those crab band walks are great glute exercise to strengthen your gluteus medius, which is a muscle at an angle that you use when you step in that direction. If that muscle is strong enough, your TFL muscle, which is the muscle that connects to your IT band, doesn't overwork. So if you have IT band problems, you can use a foam roller, stretch it, loosen that IT band up, maybe even use a tennis ball on that hip muscle, that TFL that's tight. But what's going to help the most is strengthening. So in the competitive season, if you develop IT band, you're going to want to incorporate crab walks, fire hydrants, hip abduction, so movements where you're using the hip muscle in that, that lateral motion. Important to do those exercises correctly, so again, you may need to get a physical therapist to help you with that. But all year round, we want to incorporate strength training.
And keep in mind, it doesn't have to be the same amount. So if you're doing your competition season and you're focused on training, maybe you're just going to the gym once a week and then doing that 4-point core stability routine 2 more days a week. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to go to the gym and lift weights 3 times a week, but it's important to definitely address the areas where you have issues, and especially during the off season. Be healthy so when you start each year. A great quote from Charles Schultz: "Life is like a 10-speed bicycle. Most of us have gears we never use." So what, we're kind of talking about special populations or special groups, and one of them is the aging athlete. So I'm over 40 now, so I'm a master's athlete. So what happens as we age, and it's if you look at these different characteristics of performance or health, muscular strength, power, endurance, everything basically goes down, except for body fat, which goes up. So a lot of things happen to us as we age, and by all means, we're going to get slower. We're not going to be able to generate much power. We're not going to be able to lift as much weight. We're not going to be able to run as fast. So that's just a function of aging. However, the cool thing about strength training, and to a similar extent, interval training, is it does counter the effect of aging. I mean, ultimately, aging is going to catch up, but doing things like strength training, you can maintain your muscular strength, you can maintain your power, your muscular endurance. I'll give you an example. So living in Boulder, we've had the opportunity to become friends with 6-time Ironman world champion Dave Scott. And Dave, I know he doesn't like to say it, but he just turned 60 at the beginning of January, and he's probably one of the most fit people I know, and he's still able to bike fast, still able to run well, still able to swim fast, because he's in the weight room strength training, probably 3 days a week, if not more. So he's able to sort of overcome, some of the downsides of aging by, doing that strength training in addition to his other swim, bike, and run training. And what's interesting too, there's some studies I've done in the past, so cross-sectional studies, which are basically taking a group of people at a point in time, and what they showed is if you take a younger group versus an older group, that as you get older, you lose the type 2 muscle fibers. So you basically, they atrophy, so they get weak. So those type 2 are those fast twitch fibers. So if you remember that graph, the stair-step graph I was showing earlier, if you don't, if you're only doing low intensity exercise, you're only engaging the slow twitch and maybe some of the type 2A. What's interesting though is recent studies suggest that the greater atrophy of type 2, so the greater decline of the type 2 fibers, may be more related to disuse rather than aging, since it can be reversed by strength training. So just because you're getting older, it's actually the reason you want to do the strength training, because it will help basically preserve your muscle mass and keep your body fat lower.
Yeah, it's not only true with aging, but also young people. I have a client that works in particular with younger people that, teenagers, college-age kids that play video games a lot, and they become inactive, have poor posture, develop muscular imbalances from sitting in front of the TV playing video games. So it's important, to keep your body in balance at all ages, but especially as we age. And I'm doing a strength training webinar for USA Triathlon, and it's women-specific strength training. So it's near the end of April. So if you are interested in that, I'll touch more on women-specific work, because I do work with a lot of women on strength training in my classes, and there are things we focus on a little bit more because of structural and physiological differences. And one of the major things that I think a lot of people are aware of is the Q angle, so the hip joint's wider than the knees, which is not true with every female, but mostly in general. And it's important that we don't we keep our knees. We talked about that Q pushed towards our pinky toe. So when you're doing squats, or especially if you're jumping, I see people jump up on boxes in the gym and their knees just buckle in. So you just stress your IT band, and you really don't do much for the knee strength. So it's kind of dangerous in a way, especially if you do that enough. Muscles fire at different response rates. So women tend to, and there's some research on this, that their hamstrings, certain muscles in their lower limbs do not fire as quickly as males. So they're more prone to ACL injuries, like in explosive sports. So cycling could be one of those. And bone density, and it tends to be a little lower in general, and upper body's weaker. Although I have read research, so the ladies will like this, that women have relatively stronger lower bodies, in some of these studies. And we tend to have more body fat, and there are some hormonal differences, especially we talk about we don't produce as much testosterone. So when I hear women afraid of, getting too big from lifting weights, it's really tough to do that. Most of the size comes from your nutrition, and I mean, especially if you're lifting heavy weights for a high amount of reps, your volume's high, that will, especially isolating, make those muscles grow a little bit more, but still very hard to do in females because we don't produce nearly as much testosterone as males. And, just to touch on how to incorporate some of these things in your program, we talked about that, 4-point stability. We have a lot of those great exercises on our website, and with some of my clients, what I've done recently is put together a full body strength training program, so it may take like an hour, and I'll split it up into segments, about 15 to 20 minutes, so make them little circuits. And a lot of times I'll have in their program, swim, bike, run program, I'll say, do at least one of your strength circuits today. Day 3, I'll have them maybe do 2 of those strength circuits. Another day, try to get all of them in. So by the end of the week, they've actually gotten 2 full strength training days, but maybe it was just 15 minutes after swimming, or 15 minutes before, some glute work before their, aerobic run. So make it work. Don't not do it because it's too overwhelming, because even a little bit goes a long way.
So this concludes the formal presentation. As I mentioned, we'll send out a link. You can send out a PDF version of this, as well as a link to the online version where you can watch the videos. We post the recordings of all our webinars at schooloftri.com in the library. We've got a couple coming up in week after next. If you're new to triathlon, we're just going to talk about some basics in training. And then next month, and it doesn't necessarily be your first full or half, but if you kind of want some kind of lessons learned, from my more than 15 years and Krista's 10 years of racing these long course races, we'd love to, hopefully give you some great tips to help make your race day that much more successful. School Tri again is our education website. Check it out. In the classrooms is where you'll find we've got more than 100 videos that cover all aspects of triathlon, from choosing races and planning your season to swim drills you can do. How do you sight in open water, to how do you improve your transitions, and all the way through race day and off season. And then finally, we do have training programs at enduranceworks.net. We do have a strength training program that we recently updated within the last couple weeks, and some of you had signed up for that when you signed up for the webinar, so I'll be sending that out to you in the next day or so as well. At this point, if you guys have any questions, please ask them through the chat window. So if you go to your little meeting dashboard, there should be a line that says chat. Click on the triangle and I'll open up the window. And yeah, hi Adriano. It's good to see you online, and yeah, it's thank you for joining us from Brazil.
So I have a question. Are squats and lunges ever bad for the knees? So if they're done appropriately with the right amount of weight, so correct technique, you're not overloading the weight, they are not particularly bad for the knees because they do help to strengthen the glutes, the hamstrings, the quads, and they do provide a little bit of stability. So with that said, go back to your cues, your bracing, trying to keep your spine in alignment, keeping your center of gravity where it should be, meaning you're not leaning forward so your knees aren't, the weight's not dispersed over your feet, so you're not pushing all the weight on your knees, you're supporting it with the muscular structure. So it's extremely important to have someone help you with that technique if you're experiencing knee pain. Best hip and glute exercises. So probably the weakest muscle in the triathlete, the hips, the glutes. So we have an exercise, I think it's on the YouTube channel, the fire hydrant. So you're on all fours, hands and knees, toes are off the ground, and your knees bent, and you're just lifting one leg, so we'll just say your left leg, up and down, and again, the toes off the ground because you don't want to use that to stabilize. You want the glute on the stabilizing leg to work. And you perform that several times till you feel that if you're lifting the left leg, the right glute is stabilizing. So stabilization exercises are not necessarily on the side that's active as much. They're on the side that's stabilizing the body to perform the activity on the other side. And sideline abduction, where you're just lifting your leg up to the side. Again, you want to make sure you're bracing really well so you're not compensating using your low back and not your glutes and your hips. And then I like the bridge exercise where you can do a one-leg bridge if your body's strong enough to handle that. But if you're trying to work your glutes, especially when you do a bridge, keep your rib cage low, because if you just lift your rib cage really high, you're arching your back too much so you don't get your glutes to fire. And I squeeze a yoga block in between my knees so those adductors, those inner thighs are active with the glutes.
Megan just asked a question. Is it still possible to get the updated strength training guide if you did not already choose to purchase it? Yep, I'll send out a link with information on that as well. You can also find it if you go to enduranceworks.net under training plans, and I believe the last item in the drop-down menu is training guides or ebooks. I forget what I called it, but you can find it there as well.
So I'm going to just tell you my favorite exercise for swimming, because a lot of people had asked about the best exercise for swimming, and there's a lot of shoulder issues, some surgeries, some tendonitis. My favorite one is that double external rotation. So you take the band and your palms are facing upright and you're holding a band about a little further than shoulder width apart. Elbows are locked at your side, and you just pull that band away from your body so you're externally rotating. And that's the opposite of swimming. We're getting a lot of internal rotation, so we create an imbalance. Our front of our shoulders could be a little overdeveloped. I don't know if you've seen swimmers with kind of big forward shoulders, and then the shoulder rotator muscles are just, those forward rotator muscles are overworked. So we want to get external rotators active, which will help create more power in the water. So again, that's double external rotation.
And what I'll do is the exercises that Krista's mentioning now, I'll send out a direct link to those so you have those.
Yeah, I have my ladies in class do those all the time just because of posture. And I find their traps are just overworked. Their shoulders are in their ears. So that double external rotation gets the middle back to fire really well. And I have an exercise routine. It's got three or four exercises called Baby Got Back. And you do the double external rotation in that particular video. So somebody asked how many times a week to strength train. You know, two times. David and I kind of negotiated this. We said twice a week. So again, if you're doing pieces of your overall program, then you can break those up. It's okay to do more, especially in your off season. But again, you want to sort of progress into some of those movements. And you know, we talked about you know, like the squat movement and doing one leg exercises. So you know, you start with something where, okay, I can feel my glutes when I do this, so I'm going to start with this. You know, really work on that, and then build up to doing a one-leg good morning, so you're stabilizing the hips, knees, and feet. And if you do have bad ankles, I have a client who's a runner, terrible ankles. We did squats on the Boso ball, just keeping her knees in alignment. She couldn't even stand on the Boso ball and do those at first. Now it's so easy for her, and she's felt it. She'll go out and run, and her ankles are so much stronger. So now she can do one-leg exercises because, you know, she's progressed from some of that other stuff. So see how you do on the Boso ball. Turn it over so the flat side's up. See if you can hold on to something if you're not used to it. Stand on it and do some good squats with your knees lined up with your feet, pushing through the tripod of your foot, bracing, and keeping your body upright. And I change up. Somebody asked about the routine. I try to do similar exercises. They don't have to be the same, you know, every workout, but similar meaning, okay, I'm working the full body, you know, the glutes, the middle back, the deep abdominals, doing the dead bugs, you know, things like that, double external rotation, squat exercises. But trying to get those about 3 or 4 weeks, and then, you know, maybe every couple months, depending on what you're doing. But every 4 weeks, I try to change my clients' programs to either progress or give them variety.
Okay. If you have questions, we're probably gonna wrap up. It doesn't seem like there's any more questions right now, but feel free to email us, either one of us, and you know, we'll be happy to respond. Again, you know, a ton of resources at schooloftri.com. If you need a training program, we've done a lot of them. You can find those at endurancemarkers.net, or we also link to them from schooloftri.com as well. So thank you for your time.
Oh, I had a question about the TRX. So if you use that, or you're asking if that's good, I utilize that in a lot of my programs if it's available. So a couple exercises I like to do with it are the rows. Again, keeping your shoulders out of your ears and making sure your shoulder blades are together before you row. So I call that retraction. And then some abdominal movements. So you're holding the TRX with both hands together, and just feet are underneath you like the row, and you're rotating from right to left. And then I like to do one-leg squats where one foot is in both of those straps and the other foot is stabilizing and squatting. So some great TRX movements. You just have to have somebody look at your technique and make sure you're doing it correctly.
Okay, again, thanks for coming tonight, and you know, if you want to reference this, and we've got, I think, about a dozen other webinars we've already done over the past year. We try and rotate through them each year, and obviously this is actually the first time we've done this one, but a lot of them, you know, for a number of topics, check them out, schooloftri.com in the library. If you need, you know, just basic triathlon instruction or just overview of different aspects of it, check out the schooloftri.com in the classrooms. And if you go to either schooloftri.com or Endurance Works, you'll see links for the next webinars as well. So, one more question. There's a question, are there any strength exercises that should be avoided if one is overweight and wanting to lose pounds?
Yeah, I think it's really important to avoid any exercise that causes pain. I have a client that's trying to lose a lot of weight, and when I first started working with her, I'd see her go in the weight room and grab the the cables, put a lot of weight on, and do these cable rotations. And when we started working together, I did some tests on her to check shoulder pain, flexibility, spine flexibility, and she had some issues in her shoulder and spine. So she shouldn't have been doing that movement, let alone that heavy weight and the way she was doing it. So any movements that cause pain and you have a question of how to do it correctly, and I guess that's for anybody too, but because, weight loss, there's a lot of circuits for weight loss. There's a lot of like ballistic movements where you have a lot of weight and you're trying to move fast. I see a lot of trainers really pushing their clients, and it's great to get your heart rate up, but if you're not performing it correctly and you have pain and you don't feel a lot of the muscles in the abdominals, hips, stabilizer muscles, it shouldn't feel bad. You should really enjoy some of those motions even though they might be challenging, because you should feel really good and balanced afterwards and feel like you've got a good training effect. So for weight loss, I just kind of avoid things that seem too hard on your body in general. I hope that helps.
Okay, I think we can wrap it up now. So thank you, everybody, and have a good night. And as I said, you can feel free to email either one of us with questions. And if you have feedback as well, or you see a topic you'd like us to try and cover, please let us know as well. Thanks a lot, and have a good night.